Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Politics World. I'm your host, Sam Skrubala. With the general election now just 9 days away, the race is hotting up, as Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party are closing the gap on the Conservatives. A recent YouGov projection has Labour, against expectations, gaining 28 seats, whilst the Conservatives would lose 20, leading to a hung parliament. In that scenario, we could see the other parties again act as kingmaker, as the Liberal Democrats did back in 2010. On that note, we now welcome Tom Brake, Lib Dem candidate for Carshalton and Wallington, and MP for the constituency since 1997. He also serves as his party's chief whip, foreign affairs spokesperson, and shadow leader of the House. Tom Brake, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, just to get this out of the way, your leader has been pretty clear, but in the event of a hung parliament, would the Liberal Democrats again be willing to act as a kingmaker?
Absolutely not. Tim Farron has made it very clear that there will not be a coalition involving the Liberal Democrats, and therefore I'm very disappointed that Theresa May keeps claiming that this is something that would be a possibility.
Now, looking at this election, we've really seen the issue of Brexit, which coming in was meant to be the most important issue, somewhat fall off the mainstream agenda, even behind sometimes supposedly less important issues, such as fox hunting. Do you feel that this has been to the detriment of the overall campaign?
Well, you're right that this campaign was supposed to be about Brexit. That is why the Prime Minister called the general election, of course, having said that there was no need for one and it would destabilise the country. It hasn't featured particularly heavily in the campaign. Other issues like the NHS, like funding for schools, have certainly here in Carshalton and Wallington been much more important. I think in that respect, actually, that has probably been helpful to this campaign because, of course, the Prime Minister, whoever he or she is not just going to have to deal with Brexit, but they're also going to have to deal with some really big challenges within the NHS, for instance, over funding levels and the cuts that we're seeing in our schools, and of course many other issues, whether it's issues to do with air quality, poor public transport, or any of the other problems that any government should seek to deal with during their term in office.
Well, you mentioned the NHS there, of course, a crucial issue both to the campaign and directly in your constituency of Carshalton and Wallington. Going forward, how do you intend to fight to help keep St Helier Hospital in your constituency open when it does face something of a funding crisis?
Well, first of all, by highlighting what an excellent hospital it is, in contrast, I'm afraid, to some of the comments that have been made by senior Conservatives locally, who seem to spend rather a lot of time talking down the hospital. So I'm talking it up and highlighting, for instance, that it's one of the few hospitals in London that is just about on top of the A&E waiting time targets, highlighting that it has an excellent renal unit, which is the regional renal unit for this part of London and South East, and also highlighting that it has a very good neonatal unit caring for premature babies. So I think it has an excellent track record. And what I've done in my 20 years as a Member of Parliament is I've used every opportunity I've had, whether it's questions in Prime Minister's questions, questions to health ministers, or indeed when I happen to be standing behind him in the queue waiting for a cup of coffee in Westminster, using all of those opportunities to lobby the Secretary of State for Health and other senior ministers.
I see. Also, stopping school cuts has also been a big part of your own personal campaign. How do you see this affecting your own constituency?
Well, there has been a very direct impact, and that is reflected in the many, many letters and emails that I've had from head teachers in the constituency and in the neighbouring constituency of Sutton and Cheam, who've written to me or emailed me highlighting that for primary schools, the impact is getting rid of teaching assistants, having to perhaps not recruit or replace teachers who have left. In the secondary schools, it means that senior management team members are not being replaced. It means that teachers who normally are allowed time to prepare for lessons now no longer have that because they have to be in classes instead. And it means cutting back on the range of A-levels that are offered to students because schools can no longer afford to run A-level courses for a smaller number of pupils. So it's having a real impact now, and this is before the full £3 billion worth of cuts has kicked in, which will happen by 2020.
Now, looking back at the wider campaign, Brexit has certainly been at the forefront of the Liberal Democrats' campaign, yet polling-wise, your party hasn't been able to quite make the surge that at times it appeared it was going to. Why do you think this is, and do you think we can see a sort of resurgence of the Lib Dem fight back in the last week of the campaign?
Well, first of all, I don't necessarily believe the polls. We've had many examples in the last couple of years of polls that have been completely wrong. So there is that possibility. But also, I think what the polls tend to do, because they're a snapshot of what's happening across the country as a whole, and tend to be very relatively small samples, often will not pick up areas where the Liberal Democrats are strong, such as Carshalton and Wallington. So I think they probably underrepresent our support in the areas where we are very well organised and either have someone who's been a sitting member of Parliament or a very active candidate. So I hope that will mean that whatever the polls say, that our result will be stronger on election day than it would appear to be. I suppose the other challenge for this election is that, understandably, the Prime Minister has sought to make this in effect, a presidential contest where she has she is the party. So the Tory battle bus has Theresa May's name slapped on the side of it in large letters, and it has Conservative Party in very small letters. So she has made herself the central feature of the campaign, and she has also sought to make Jeremy Corbyn the central feature of the campaign. And when that happens, it's harder for the smaller parties to break into an attempt to just make it about the two main contenders.
Now, how would you crystallise your party's message? Why should people vote for the Liberal Democrats?
Well, our message is a very simple one. As a party, we want a Britain that is optimistic, that is progressive, a country that is open, tolerant and united. And I'm afraid the fallout from Brexit has meant that, and we've seen this reflected in the rise or the spike in hate crime shortly after the EU referendum, the country is less united than it was, and I would say less tolerant. So as a party, those are the things, the values or principles that we will fight on. We have made it clear that we don't support the approach the Prime Minister is adopting towards Brexit, and that's a feature of our campaign. We think that she is going for a version of Brexit that is going to do maximum damage to not only to British jobs and therefore British families, but also to the UK economy, to our influence in the world, our diplomatic presence, and will have very many other negative impacts. For instance, her desire, it would seem, to take us out of every single EU institution, including, for instance, Euratom, the body that's responsible for ensuring atomic energy standards are appropriate and observed in the EU. All of those things, our Prime Minister seems to think we should not be part of, and I think that would be extremely regrettable and would simply leave the UK in a position of having to create a whole host of parallel organisations that ended up shadowing what those bodies were doing at huge cost to the British taxpayer.
And one final question. You've been an MP for Carshalton and Wallington since 1997. In that time, what would you say has been your proudest political achievement?
Well, there have been many, both large and small, but the battle that we fought to ensure that the A&E and maternity services continue to operate at St Helier, that's perhaps one of the biggest success stories. We've had others along the way in terms of, for instance, there was a proposal to stop trains going from here through to North London, which many people relied on, which we managed to fight off and maintain those train services. And then there have been many, many individual cases where we've succeeded in getting compensation for people or ensuring that people received the benefits they're entitled to, or, for instance, got appropriate housing. So there's been a range of perhaps great success stories and much more individual case successes. And in terms of the number of people that I and my staff have helped in the last 20 years. We worked it out at about 150,000 cases that were dealt with, and I'm proud of that track record.
Tom Brake, thank you for coming on today's show.
Thank you.
I would again like to thank today's guest, Tom Brake, and thank you all for listening. Remember, you can download the podcast off iTunes now. Go to iTunes and type in Politics World with Sam Strubala, or go to our YouTube channel. Please watch the videos, and if you enjoy, like and subscribe. I'm Sam Strubala. Thanks again to Tom Brake, and this has been Politics World.